Reverend Dr. Alex G. How are you, Dr. G?
Hey, Superintendent Danny, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to talking with you today. Thank you for reaching out to me.
Oh my goodness, what a privilege this is. There's so much to talk about. I hope that 30 minutes is enough time. Tell us a little bit about, you're a married man. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Sure. Jackie and I met in college. I was a newly appointed associate pastor. I was a senior in college. It was my last semester. Jackie's roommate, Jackie was a track star at Wisconsin. Her roommate was on the women's basketball team, invited Jackie to church. And her first visit, she gave her life to the Lord. And I was one of the ministers sort of on duty that day. So I got a chance to pray with her and help lead her to the Lord. And we were friends for about 2 or 3 years before we started dating. We have been married a little over 32 years. We have one daughter who's in graduate school.
You got married when you were 8, right?
Yes.
You have one daughter?
We have one daughter, Lexi, and she is in grad school, and she's studying to become a children's librarian. She's always loved books and reading, and it's wonderful to see her do something she really, really loves.
Oh, that's awesome. Tell us a little bit about how you got connected to the covenant.
There's a couple of different pathways that led me to the covenant. Brenda Salter McNeil and I have been friends forever. Her son Omari is my godson. And so, before Mia was born, before Lex was born, Brenda said, Alex, I found a denomination that I'm going to get ordained in. And because we both had similar Pentecostal backgrounds, I said, are you serious? And she said, it's called the Covenant. I said, that doesn't sound like a denomination, the Covenant. And so Brenda put it right. So she didn't give me the full name. I think she probably did eventually. But man, that was years ago, Danny. I think that what really helped me to get connected is Dave Gibbons is a good friend of mine. I met Peter Ahn, pastor of Metro Church in New Jersey, while he was interning with Dave. Long and short of it is, Peter and I became friends. We're best of friends. But Peter invited me to a trip to South Africa. And I'd gotten to know other covenanters through Dave. So I got to know Eugene Cho and Peter and other folks. I'm kind of Adam Edgerly, Brian Kim, and others. So many of us went to Africa together. And while we were there, they mentioned something about midwinter, that when they come back, they need to pack, they need to unpack and repack to go right to midwinter. And I said, what's midwinter? And they said, you're not covenant? Because some of the people didn't know me. I said, no, what's midwinter? Is that a conference I'm missing? And they said, you should be covenant. And the joke is, I actually said to them, is that a cult? Because I've never heard people recruit people so energetically that way, like, you should be covenant, you should be covenant. And so one thing led to another. I got information. Jolene Carlson and Don Davenport drove to Madison, met with me and the leaders of our church, and answered all of our questions about covenant. They started building a relationship with us. Jerome Nelson was still recovering from his illness during that time. And while I was preaching at Metro Church, so I think my friends, and many of them were Asian American, told me about the covenant, but Henry Greenwich and Wayne Carlson really brought me in. I was visiting my friend John Teeter once, and Wayne Carlson said, Alex, why aren't you covenant? And I said, because I can't get anybody to return my phone call. I'm trying. And so a few days later, I was in New Jersey about to preach at Peter's church. Henry Greenwich called me, said, if you can get to Atlanta for a peer mentoring conference, you'll meet other Black pastors of multi-ethnic churches. And I said, Black pastors of multi-ethnic church? Are you serious? And I got there and I saw the connection and the camaraderie and the love and the cultural pride. And I came back and told my team, I don't know their doctrine. I don't know their mission statement. I don't know any of that, but I know I want to be a part of that. I don't know any of those things. We'll find them out, but I want to be a part of that. And then that's when Jolene and Don came. But it was a process, but it was really relational and people caring and wanting me to be plugged into a place because they knew I had decades of ministry experience, but it was really through relationships with trusted people that brought me in.
So part of your formation in the covenant has been through the AMA, which stands for the African American Ministerial Association. You've been an officer with them for many years as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. But I also just say, just so my Kappa friends don't get mad, it was the Kappa friends. It was Eugene, it was Peter that said, You need to be covenant. So they really teed me up. And then the AAMA brought it on across the line by the hospitality. What it's meant for me, Danny, is that within the covenant, there's a place where I can go and be with like-minded folks who have similar struggles, who have a commitment to multi-ethnicity, but also a strong Afrocentric worldview. But it's a place where the question is, how do we influence the denomination and find our way in the denomination, and be a part of the denomination and being very relevant in our own context. So I've met relationships through that, you know, Keelan Smith and Brian Murphy and Michael and Kimberly Thomas and others. I shouldn't just start, you know, name others, you know, Harvey Carey. They're just tremendous people who I hope to be in friendship with for the rest of my life. But so many like-minded folks who are funny, who are serious, who are great ministers, great pastors, great thought leaders. And it has really felt like a spiritual and cultural home. And for a Black person who grew up in Black Pentecostalism, I didn't think I was going to find that in a predominantly white Swedish Lutheran denomination. So that was really a surprise for me in coming to the covenant. I didn't expect that.
Since then, you've planted a church called Fountain of Life in I was going to say Milwaukee. I'm sorry, what part of Wisconsin?
Don't say Milwaukee. in Madison.
Madison, Wisconsin. Sorry about that.
No problem. I'm confused because I'm wearing Chicago Cubs. I was born in Chicago. My wife's from Chicago, so I have dual citizenship.
Well, we still claim you.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about Fountain of Life, and you know, it's a multicultural church. You have amazing leaders there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure.
This is time to flaunt.
Well, you know, actually, a pastor from Chicago, my mother's pastor from Chicago, planted our church. It was actually Union Tabernacle Church of God in Christ. And I became the associate pastor 40 years ago. And in 97, we became non-denominational. Probably 92 became non-denominational. And so many of the folks in the church see me as the founder because none of them remember the days 40 years ago when our pastor from Chicago came. But when I became pastor, Danny, there are about 28 or 30 of us. Probably 25 of us were graduates from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we really looked like a Black InterVarsity Fellowship or Navigators Fellowship. It was really college-based. I asked these young Black professionals to not leave Madison. They were from Memphis, Chicago, Evansville, Indiana, Milwaukee. I asked them to stay and help me to build a Black middle class and to create a ministry that would reach out to the community. Those same folks helped me to create Nehemiah, our church's outreach. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But these folks stayed in Madison and brought their academics, their love for God, their love for culture. They had learned to become cross-cultural. And we did life together we've done life together for like the last 35 years. We've buried parents together. We've buried infants together. We've gone through stillbirth with each other. We've gone through my mom's dementia. And these people, they're my family. They are my family. And they're the people who gave me and us the blessing to join Covenant. It's a multi-generational church.
Yeah.
Although I'm 56, I'm older than the average age. So it still tends to be a younger church. Another thing that I love about it while I'm flaunting is that we often talk about diversity in terms of culture and ethnicity, but socioeconomically, we are a very diverse church. So we have adjunct faculty. We have tenured faculty. We have folks with PhDs on committees with people with GEDs. And you can't tell who has a GED or the PhD because leadership is not relegated to just those with graduate degrees. So for me, that economic diversity is very beautiful because we learn together. So again, you have folks, who are chief leaders in the university system, and they're working with friends who they work for the sanitation department. They're trash collectors, but they're in fellowship, and their kids know each other and their spouses know each other. I love that it has a strong outreach component, and recently, because of the outreach component, we're finding that middle-class white atheists and agnostics are converting and are coming because they've admitted that they left their churches because they felt that social justice issues were biblical and their churches never talked about it. So they threw church and God away. My executive assistant who set up this meeting was an agnostic until a few years ago. His wife was atheist and raised atheist. And she's in Pastor Tyler's Bible study. She's in a Bible study for new believers. Another woman converted who was an atheist. Her parents were atheists. She converted in her late 40s or early 50s. She works in our children's ministry. A former atheist who's a school teacher. And all of those white folks who are former atheists and agnostics are part of our Standing in Solidarity ministry. I didn't create it, but our white partners created a ministry so that they could show support to people of color inside our church, particularly leaders of color inside our church. It is amazing.
So you have several dynamics at Fountain of Life. You have a multi-social, social economic, you have multicultural, and you have multi-generational.
Yes.
So that obviously makes for a beautiful church, but it's also a messy church. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. I'm hoping that the brunt of the messiness is over, because I announced to our church, Danny, that we were going to be a multi-ethnic ministry in 1985. I was a senior in college. I was an Afro-American history major. I was in a lecture about the role of the Black church. And I said, I can't wait to become a kente cloth wearing, Negro spiritual singing church. I just become the associate pastor, and I clearly heard the Holy Spirit say to me in Humanities Hall, your church is not going to be a Black church. And I said out loud to the Lord, everybody knows that non-Blacks don't follow Black leadership. What do you mean? I said that out loud. And so it was difficult. Black people didn't believe it. They didn't want to do it. They had bad interactions. They thought that white people would come inside the church and say, this is too long, this is too loud, you all can't be doing this, this goes too long. And we did have those moments and those times. And then there were times we tried to change for the non-Blacks and the non-Blacks tried to change for us. A lot of bad blood in that. But what happened was we stayed true to what we believed was what was biblical and what we believed God was saying to us. And then we just started building relationships. Now, again, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's all fine and dandy, but when you've been doing life with non-Black people for 20 years, like I've known some of these folks longer than I know my daughter. There's a white kid, beautiful kid in our church. His name is Joshua. I'm his godfather. His younger brother is Alexander. His parents named him after me. Their pastor, like we met when they worked for InterVarsity. And so that doesn't mean you don't have issues, but we've been long enough for us to become family with them. So when there's death and trouble and stuff that's going on, we're really there for each other. Our music director, Becca Grant, is an amazing musician. She studied jazz at Wisconsin. Her mom was an organist in the Lutheran church, but she got pointers and training from Black organists and Black keyboard folks. So with Becca, we've been able to do hymns. We can do Hezekiah Walker. We can do Hosanna Integrity music. We can do Hill songs. And then we can do straight hymns, and she can do anything that Fred Hammond or Kirk Franklin or Hezekiah Walker can do. But because we become family, she's learned to do that so that we can have a blend of sound. And so there are a lot of painful years, but the folks who stuck it out, Danny, they've really become family to us. And so we know we have those hard points, but now we're at a place where the good years are more memorable and they're closer to us. Yeah. Than the hard years. But you're absolutely right. It's messy because it's too much for some. It's not enough for others. African-American churches still want to call us a Black church because I'm Black and I'm a leader. But we're clearly not just a church for African-Americans. And so what do we call it? How do we embrace it? Has been very tricky to say the least. But I would say from all ethnic perspectives, folks are proud to be a part of a church that's at least embracing each other. And our non-Black people are particularly appreciative. They have said so to me. They've articulated it, that they have learned to be in predominantly Black space when all of what's happening in the world is happening. They feel like they were prepped for this world, whereas some of their white friends are trapped in other pockets of white evangelicalism where they're trying to think, is talking about this biblical? Should we be handling these issues? Is there really a problem? Just keep your hands up and nothing will happen to you. They feel very grateful that they are part of a community that has given them a context for reality. And that makes me feel very good about this process.
You are an incredible preacher. One of your dear friends,
Thank you.
the Swansons, said that the best message they ever heard preached at a conference, a celebration, was by you, and that should happen soon. And this is why we tried to get you last year, but unfortunately we couldn't get our dates together. Tell me, what does it feel like preaching to different social, economic, interracial, and of course intergenerational, and how do you keep it all together?
That's a great question, Danny. A couple of things. One is, my mother modeled cross-cultural relationships for me. So as early as 7 years old, when we moved here from Chicago, white friends would visit my mom, other single moms with their children. So it's not unusual for me at the age of 6 to have friends who are white sleeping on your bedroom floor, being at the breakfast table together, lunch, dinner table together, going to the zoo together, watching your parents play cards and dance and fishing together. So my mom modeled cross-cultural relationships so that it didn't become strange. And so my mindset or worldview for multi-ethnicity, it did not grow from a theological perspective, but from a very practical and sociological perspective. It was my practice. It's why I felt comfortable hanging out at New Song in pastoral gatherings where I was one of maybe 2 other African Americans. It might have been me and Brian Laritz and Adam Edgerly. But so I grew up in a space where I was always outnumbered. So I learned to thrive in that space. And so I was able to have real cross-cultural relationships, which helps me to see the gospel from different perspectives. But what that meant was I needed to also make sure that women were preaching, that white women were preaching, that white men are preaching, that we have Asian American men preaching, that we have different cultural backgrounds and perspectives really preaching and leading. That helps us to keep a contextualized message. Plus, we work to have that representation at the board level, pastoral level, ministry level, on the stage, and in the audience. And so that helps to do that. And I think a sheer love for God's word and God's people is easily translatable. But the other thing is, people who don't worship in are part of our experience, Danny, they think that whatever they refer to as Black preaching is only for African American folks. But the truth in Black preaching or Black exegesis is about pain and triumph. It's about pain and redemption. It's about bringing the honesty of your pain to the table. That's why soul music, soul food, these things are about telling stories. I got over. I'm going to a place where I can sit down. So our music, food, culture, our swag was about our story and being resilient and resistant and bouncing back. Well, there are plenty of hurt people who go to places where pain is not on display. And so when that pain is on display, people begin to connect, because the message then, irrespective of what the ethnicity of the speaker is, it's about recovering from hunger, abuse, incest, neglect, rape, addiction, incarceration. So what we find is our non-Black folks come, particularly those who are white, because they're not used to a context that can be filled with emotion, freedom, truth, worship, and community. So all the things that I thought would be a hindrance to cross-cultural work and ministry has actually been a conduit for it.
Wow. Believe it or not, our time is flying. Tell us a little bit about Nehemiah. Tell us about the work that you do with Nehemiah.
Sure. I was invited to a conference years ago, Danny, with Presbyterian friends in Madison. While we were non-denominational, there was no ministerial fellowship. So we had to connect with people based upon our ministry affinities. And so the Presbyterians loved youth ministry and introduced us to Young Life and InterVarsity. But they invited us to an urban conference called Scoop in Chicago. And that probably is the first time I ever saw Brenda Salter McNeil, Ray Bakke, Bud Ipema, like all of these giants, John Perkins, all these giants. And I felt like I had a rebirth. I felt like I had become a Christian again and had a new call. I didn't know Christians did housing and daycare. I had no idea. I got so motivated that I left my state job. I was an assistant to the dean in the School of Pharmacy at the University of Wisconsin, had a cushy middle management position as an advisor, which is basically tenured. And I left it. I took a 1-year absence because while I was touring Chicago, I met Wayne Gordon, who introduced me to the Christian Community Development Association.
Coach.
Yeah. Coach is my brother's pastor. So my brother, Edward, and I have the same dad. And so he grew up in Chicago. Well, he's in Coach's Real Hope in Chicago. My little brother introduced me to Coach back in the 80s. So we became friends. And as I watched the work that Coach did, I said, will you teach me how to do this in a Madison context? So Danny, I would get in my car and drive to Chicago to be coached by Coach. And so in 92, we launched Nehemiah because the Black community had doubled from 80 to 90. And we being Black people, were not represented as teachers, administrators, social workers, judges. So we created Nehemiah to be a Black social service agency that was subcontracted by our county government to provide therapeutic services, mentoring, case management, in-home family therapy for Black families. That was our introduction. We then moved into leadership development because many of those we served who were our clients became our volunteers because they overcame. Then we moved into reentry with support services. Then we moved into reentry housing and job placement. So we placed over 500 men in jobs. We own 4 buildings where we placed men who are coming out of prison. And our reentry ministry is run by 2 men with felonies. One is on an ankle bracelet for the rest of his life. The leader, my vice president of reentry, I met him when he was a drug dealer, and the governor just appointed him to be on the board for the state public defender. He is the boss of our state's public defender. He's on a board that oversees her office. And so we have people on our staff who were drug addicts, affiliated, in prison, and they've overcome with the grace of God with salvation. And so through very real services, they are ministering the gospel and the message of hope to people. And Nehemiah, which was meant to be a place that served the most broken, became a place where the most broken were trained as leaders. And those folks who benefited from our services are now leading and providing our services. And we're almost 30 years old. We started in 92, so we're 28 years old. We've served tens of thousands of people. We now offer training for non-Black allies. So we've taken non-Black folks through a 9-week Black History training course, a US Black History training course. We've taken 1,000 people through that. We just landed a contract with the city of Monona. The mayor has contracted our nonprofit to help them to wrestle with issues of police brutality, community reaction, thinking through increasing diversity, so that Nehemiah has grown, Danny, from an organization that builds capacity in the Black folks to also working with non-Black folks to understand systemic racism and the actions they can take to help dismantle it, and to bring both groups together to work in tandem to create multiple solutions together. So Nehemiah is not creating the solutions, but it's creating the space where our non-Black allies and Black folks can work together to create solutions. So we have a court observers program, we have book groups, and we're doing things with kids, and we're developing leaders. And it's really amazing to have the faith community be at the forefront of real racial healing and change in our community. Absolutely.
You have, talking about, we are living in a time of pandemic, and we're living in a time of racial unrest and strife.
Right.
You have a podcast called Black Like Me, where you share, where you share your own experience, where you share other people's experience. What is it like to be a Black man in the United States at this point?
That's a great point. One of the things I say, Danny, is being Black in America is always explaining what it means to be Black in America. So that's a part of it, defining it. But it means that right now there's a revelation of hindrances, of systemic realities that we've been trying to articulate for decades, that people have not really been able to respond to. So now with COVID-19, it's unveiling the fact that Black and brown people are more susceptible to this, and Native Americans, but a lot of that's due to stress. A lot of those pre-existing issues are stress related. And so So being Black in America means that we're now having people say, we've been trying to tell y'all, we've been trying to tell you. We know we watched George Floyd, but we also watched Eric Garner, like y'all, and we also watched Rodney King. We forget generation to generation. And so it means that America is now saying we see it, but with bated breath, we're wondering, but will you make the systemic changes so that it won't happen? So yeah, we're changing how Aunt Jemima looks and Uncle Ben's rice look, and we're taking down the Confederate flags at NASCAR. But are we putting any money into culinary schools that will help more Black people work for Pillsbury or work for some of those other companies, Duncan Hines? And so my concern is we can be asked to come in during these times to comment on what's going on, but I'm wondering if we're going to be called to the table to ask, how do we change what's going on? The reality of being Black in America is that we are the survivors of centuries and centuries of systemic racism. And if we talk about it too strongly, we're still demonizing, called angry and unfocused. Right. And if we don't, we're a sellout. And so it's a multifaceted experience being Black. And how do we maintain that dance and tension between our church and faith affiliations and the nonprofit world and funders and other Blacks in our community? So it's a very unique dance and a very tiring one. But whatever I'm dealing with today, last summer I went to West Africa. I stood in some of the largest slave dungeons in West Africa. Regardless of what I'm going through, it's nothing like what my great grandmothers did, getting on those ships and coming here after being beaten and raped. And I've also just completed a documentary in which I'm featured meeting my white relatives who are the descendants of the slave owners, the G family, Reuben Joshua G and his family. I've met his great-great-grandchildren who are the heirs of the G plantation, the G money. And so, no pun intended by saying G money. But having been in West Africa and Mississippi to see both sides of my reality, and being a disciple of a strong grandmother who believed in the power of God, I feel that the church is probably the best hope of standing strong in this racial divide, because I know where I've come from, I know where I'm going, I know what I've overcome, and I feel like those who led me to the Lord, those who are still in Africa and those who are brought to America, are hoping that my generation will stand strong, bring change, not compromise. I feel the weightiness of it, but that also feels very honoring.
Wow, I wish I could ask you 10 more questions. Let me ask you just one last one.
Sure.
As a brown person, we have similar experiences.
Right.
How can we become better allies in the transformation that we hope to achieve? We're not asking for preferred treatment. We're asking for equal treatment, and to have this dignity and the imago Dei that everybody else has. How can we be better allies, the brown and Black communities?
Not allowing greater powers to be, dominant culture, to pit us against each other. We didn't call ourselves Black. You all didn't call yourselves brown. Asian Americans didn't call themselves yellow. Those were designations given by white people and Europeans to show where we were on the cultural ranking and who was closer and further away from whiteness. And so we have to avoid that that instigation. I think we have to realize that we're better and stronger together, and not feel that it's a zero-sum game, that if you strive, we don't make it, and if we strive, you don't. I think it's also important, Danny, for us to be focused on the needs of our community and still be collaborative. So I think we have to be careful to define what that looks like and not let others to define it, because the issues are very different in some cases, but it means that's why we need each other. When we launched Justified Anger, it's an initiative of Nehemiah that's looking at changing systemic racism. I invited some of the key Latino influencers, and I didn't select those. I asked key friends to invite those who they thought in their own community. And we talked together. We called it a Black and Brown dinner. We met in my home. We catered food and we talked. And some of the leaders said, we know that mass incarceration is jacking up the Black community. You got our support. We're going to need your support around issues of immigration. This is a conversation we had back in 2014. But it was very clear. we love what you all are doing and thank you for bringing us to the table. But our focus will be Latino kids, but we got you. And we said, no, that's fine. We understand it because we've got to put all of our efforts into our Black kids who are failing, but we're glad to know you got our back. We've got yours as well. So for me, it was powerful because there was an acknowledgement. We've known each other. People sort of state what their focus was, but in public, we got you. But they said, but we're not going to stop doing this to start doing that. And so it was a clear indication that we support multi-ethnicity because that's important. But right now, there's so much that's going on. The future of our community rests upon us as Latinx leaders. And we said the future of our community rests on the shoulders of committed Black folks. So let's connect, let's affirm, let's continue to talk. But we understand what our work is as we leave this place. I felt it was very honoring. It was not pretentious. We know where everyone stood, but we also stood together. So unity does not mean that we all work on the same things, but it does mean that we are aware of what's important to each other and we must have each other's back. And I feel like we have maintained that. The school district here just hired the first Black superintendent, and the committee that was in charge of that is, Latino and African American folks. The president of the school board is a Latina, but then African American folks are saying, don't forget, Black kids are failing. So I feel like when it's really important, we really know how to collaborate, but it goes to building relationships that are away from the issues, away from the politics. We got to get in each other's homes. We got to sit down and have a dinner together, a meal together, drink together. And I think that's with Black, white, that's with Black, brown, I think that's what takes place. With my Asian American friends, we stayed in each other's homes. We laughed, we talked. And I think it's the relationships. And the church knows how to be relational, Danny. I think we forget that part, but we know how to be relational. And I feel that that's been the bedrock of every key relationship, whether it's within the AMA, in here in Madison, we have a similar group that's called the AACC, so I get my A's and letters mixed up. But I think we work to do that. I'm the liaison from AAMA to Kappa. And Stephanie Ann Mathis is the liaison from Kappa to AAMA. And then we're working to do that with the other groups as well. But because we've talked and worked and we have a history, but we're trying to model that we need liaisons between the various groups so that we know what's happening and how to be supportive and how to stand together. And I have to say, having been a part of the last few ethnic commission meetings, I am proud to be a part of those collaborative discussions that we've had with leadership and with John Winrick. And that gives me a great sense of pride of things that are happening inside the covenant, being a part of that ethnic commission. That's actually mind-boggling. I don't know other denominations that have something that's authentic and that's relevant.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Pastor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the podcast. Sometimes I cry with the podcast. Sometimes I laugh. You certainly emote a lot of emotions out. And thank you for your ministry in Madison and for the wonderful church. I can't wait to visit you. I hope to visit you when this pandemic is done.
Yes,
I love your leaders and your organist sounds amazing. I want to meet her already.
Oh my goodness. Yes. And I want to invite folks, even though my podcast, Danny's called Black Like Me, it's for anyone. Most of our listeners are non-Black because they want to understand some of the Black issues and causes, but I needed a place that wasn't the pulpit. So I could use some very strong language, but pointed language, not just being gratuitous, but just talking about the angst. I was on a Zoom call that was bombed. I was called the N-word 85 times. Then they wrote KKK 250 times. And then they wrote all N-words should die. The FBI called me as a response to that. I'll send you some links. Local news station, 2 TV stations carried it, newspaper carried it, because there were 70 white people in the room watching it happen because I was training them on being allies. I didn't end the meeting. I said, no, you want to work with Black issues? This is what it's like being Black in America. Now, what did you hear? What did you feel? What do you think about that? And that's nothing compared to the silent racism. You all are shaken up because you heard somebody call me the N-word. I feel that same thing in certain places when the word's not used. And so how do we process this? So I need a space to talk so that it doesn't make me sick. So I feel that those outlets keep me healthy. And I love Fountain of Life Church that shares me with Nehemiah and Black Like Me and the community, because I want to model that that a covenant pastor is also a community chaplain, and that we pastor outside the walls.